Please be seated. If you haven't done so already, please turn to Psalm 95. That's our text this morning. So as we continue through this journey through the mountain range of the Psalter, Psalm 95 is our trailhead. Today is the day. One of the things I absolutely love about Sundays is this dual purpose of worship and rest. We gather together to celebrate God and affirm faith in the person and work of Jesus Christ. And then we scatter to enjoy just a glimpse, a sliver of rest before a full week starts and we're on mission. As humans, we need rest. It's kind of ironic that we're talking about this after a weekend where we've gotten very little of it. Without sleep, without rest, our bodies will fail to function as they should. Although one of the healthiest things that we can do, it's even one of the most spiritual things we can do, is sleep. And even though that's the case, we often find ourselves always on the go, on the run, busy, we are active, we are working, we are tired. That's often what we find. You greet anyone and you say, "How are you doing?" The buzzwords are, after this glazed look comes over their face, what? "I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm busy." Those are usually the first things out of our mouth. And we often wear them as a badge of honor. But really what they are is more a mark of unbelief. If there were more hours in the day, we'd fill them with stuff. And often we tire ourselves and we work endlessly because we don't trust that God will come through without all this extra effort on our behalf. Now, we're not encouraging sloth or mediocrity, but that's usually not our problem, is it? Do we know how to rest? Have you ever considered that? Do we as a people know how to rest? Do we know how to catch our breath in healthy ways? My life verse, if I had such a thing, would be Psalm 127:2. "It is vain that you rise up early and go late to rest, eating the bread of anxious toil, for he gives his beloved sleep." If I had a life verse, that would be it. This would be my tagline. And so that's why the item from our gear list that I would pull out of our day pack, which I'm not doing this morning because my hammock would be about 8 feet long and it'd be strewn all over. So there you have it. We'll show you the picture of it. This is what we'd be pulling out of our pack. This is what's on our gear list, is the hammock. The best part of any trail hike, no matter the distance, no matter the sights, no matter the adventure that you experience, is crawling into your hammock back at base camp. That's the best part. Whether you're hiking 3 miles or 21 miles, it is great just to kick off your hiking shoes, to crawl in your hammock, and just collapse. So then some would argue, just skip the hike altogether, right? And go straight to the hammock. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. However, there is something that is thoroughly rewarding, satisfying about spending yourself, about exhausting yourself, about accomplishing something, and then resting. So this morning, our psalm is one of both worship and warning. Our psalm invites us to join the journey. Come, hike with us. Our psalm encourages us to join in celebratory song. Come, sing with us. Our psalm this morning comforts us as the people of God. Come, identify with us. Our psalm also warns us of danger. Come, rest with us. Don't reject God and miss out on his rest. So as we work through this psalm, the first 5 verses are our first checkpoint. Let's journey together in this joyful celebration. Oh, come, let us sing to Yahweh. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. Let us make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise. For Yahweh is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hand are the depths of the earth. The heights of the mountains are his also. The sea is his, for he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. The psalmist invites us to join in this journey. That's really what, oh, come, could be translated. Come, let's travel together. Come, let's hike the trail together. I imagine this psalm being one that it was sung as they went to the tabernacle, as they went to the temple to worship. It's not listed among one of the Psalms of Ascent. There's this group of Psalms of Ascent that they would use for Pilgrim Feast, but I imagine that they were singing this one as well. The song that's celebratory, that's come as they're journeying on pilgrimage toward Jerusalem, toward the temple. They're singing this psalm. I imagine that taking place. The psalm is one of joyful celebration. So what are we celebrating? Why are we singing and shouting and rolling out the barrel? Is it because our team has just won the championship after a 50-year drought? Nope, it's something even more glorious than that. And it's our God. This psalm describes Yahweh as the rock of our salvation. His presence is with us. He is a great God. The psalmist says he's a great king above all the gods. He is creator and sustainer. Because of who Yahweh is, our response is to sing, to make a joyful noise, to enjoy his presence with thanksgiving. So come, travel with us, join us in the journey, join in the chorus and enter into his presence with singing, with thanksgiving. Sing of his goodness. Let's celebrate together his rule and his reign. This psalm is celebratory and joyful. And the worship and celebration continues as we move into checkpoint number 2. But the emphasis changes. It shifts a little bit. Not just from singing about who God is, but singing about who we are because of him. It talks about our identity as God's people. So it's one thing to recognize God for who he is and sing about that, which is awesome. We've done that this morning. But it's all the more glorious as we are considered to be part of his team. This is celebratory for us as well. It is exciting, it is meaningful to be marked as one of God's people, to be identified as one of the sheep under his shepherding watch care. Sheep. What do we know about sheep? There is something about sheep, right? That's not glamorous. You know, we don't want to be described often as sheep. And as I consider different sports mascots, there are some curiously weak mascots out there. Sammy the Slug, for instance, from UC Santa Cruz. Wheezy the Boll Weevil. I mean, they really think a lot of their team, right? If your mascot is Sammy the Slug, you know, that track team is not winning a whole lot of medals. Or all the fighting veggies that are out there. You might be surprised. The fighting okra, pickles, artichokes. I mean, look them up. Google this stuff. You'll get 15 of the worst mascots ever. And I don't know of any team adopting the sheep as a mascot. Ram? Yeah. You know, they're strong. They've got horns. They're aggressive. But sheep? Mm-mm. Why? Sheep are prey, not predators. Sheep are needy. They are docile. They are helpless. They are in desperate need of a shepherd. Sheep are not considered among the brightest or the best. Listen to how one of the shepherdesses describes the many different ways in sheep, they're determined to make the not top 10 list. This author writes, "My mother, a hill farmer of consummate skill, is still amazed at the variety of ways a sheep can find to die. Even the hardy Welsh mountain breed with which I was brought up are susceptible to braxy, pulpy kidney, staggers, pneumonia, pasturella, twin lamb disease, cancer, hypothermia in the winter, maggots in the summer, scab, scrapy foxes, crows, and dogs. They push their heads through fences and get stuck. They climb trees to pick up foliage and then get hung up by their horns or legs. They fall down banks, get bitten by snakes and stung by wasps. They tumble into ponds and streams. They gorge themselves on fallen ash leaves, roll on their backs, and blow up like balloons. They poison themselves on ragwort. Ram's horns regularly get stuck in their own heads. They starve, freeze, get depressed, and fall ill. But a good shepherd can counter every affliction." So as underwhelming as being identified as a sheep might sound, it's really about whose flock you're in. It's really about who is your shepherd. So Abraham, Moses, and David, they all knew what it was like to be a shepherd and care for sheep. A shepherd was a warrior protector and caring provider. A shepherd is both strong and gentle. A shepherd leads and serves. Therefore, to be identified as one of God's sheep, it's really worth singing about. We know this shepherd. We can trust this shepherd. We will follow this shepherd. And so it's at this point that this psalm takes a hard shift, because in verse 6 it says, "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before Yahweh our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture and the sheep of his hand." And then there's a warning today. If you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. And this is crazy. It's almost as if, two of the psalmists are running together with their sheep music, and they run into each other in the temple, and all their notes fall on the ground, and they scramble them up, and they pick up their songs, and now they come together, and it's like these two songs are jumbled up, and now we have this hard shift. It's celebratory, it's praiseworthy, it's let's sing about God and our identity with him, and then, oh, by the way, it's like, what just happened? The worship team fumbled, right? No, that's not what happened. If we're continuing with our trail analogy, we have just hiked to a very dangerous ravine, and the sign reads, "Danger, bridge out." And now we're left to turn back or plummet to our death. That's the warning here. The psalmist says, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. Remember the Exodus? Remember the wilderness? Remember Meribah and Massah? See, places are often given names because of either heroic events that take place, or a significant person does something at this place, whether it's a battle that's won or lost. It could be an infamous last stand. It could be this crazy occurrence that happens at this place. Or it could be a geographical feature, and this place gets a name. Some names are meant to inspire based on the event, while others are meant to serve as a warning. Careful, or this too will happen to you. Now, no one wants to be that tagline. No one wants to be the meme, hashtag moron, that kind of stuff. No one wants to be like, hey, at least I didn't pull a Giles Litzner, right? No one wants to be that punchline. But we are a people in need of continual reminders. If we don't remember the past, we're doomed to repeat it, right? Scars, those serve as wonderful reminders of, I don't want to experience that again, right? We all have those types of scars. And even though we need regular reminders as people, not all reminders are bad. Some of them are very healthy. They serve as an encouragement or a reinforcement. Some of them are very helpful and hope-filled blessings. However, some reminders are warnings. Avoid this negative consequence. So when our son Elijah is disobeying or failing to follow instructions, he's not listening very well, it's been a while, and he's responding poorly, I'll simply ask him this question. Elijah, do you need a reminder? That quickly he responds, nope, I don't need a reminder. The warning in this psalm is a reminder that what happens in the wilderness doesn't stay in the wilderness. Think back to Exodus 17. This psalm is calling out Exodus 17. It's serving as a warning. And what happened at Meribah, what happened at Massah that was worth reminding them and warning the people about? What's the problem taking place in Exodus 17? They have just exited, they've left Egypt, and they find themselves camping at the the wilderness of Rephidim, and so they've been led out by Yahweh, their shepherd, their king, their God, and his shepherd leader Moses, and they find themselves camping out in the desert, much like we did this last weekend, right? We can recognize the heat. The problem is there's no water for this mass of people and their livestock. It's a big deal, right? Conservatively, there were approximately 30,000 people, up to about 2 million people. That's what's going on. No one knows for sure, and commentators range between that. That's how many people are camping out in the wilderness. They're in the desert. They're thirsty. It's longer than just a weekend. It's not that they had no running water. It's that they had no water. It's a big deal. And so what was their response? Their response was they remembered what just took place and God doing all these miraculous wonders and bringing them out of the land of Egypt. And they remembered how God trumped all these Egyptian gods. And then as the army's bearing down on them and they come to the Red Sea, God opens that thing up and they pass through on dry land. And then he immediately just demolishes the entire Egyptian army. And he's provided for them. And they trust him. And they're like, surely this God can provide water in the wilderness. No, that wasn't their response. That's what you would expect their response to be after they have just seen with their eyes and experienced with their lives this God of wonders on display. But instead, how do they respond? They quarrel against Moses, God's leader, and they challenge God. Even though they saw firsthand, here's what God has done. It is impressive. I can only imagine what it would have been like to be in Egypt and to be led out by God through all these signs and wonders, and just impressive. And yet, they still couldn't believe that God was for them. They still couldn't trust this God, the fact that he was their shepherd and that he actually cared for them. And what's their response in Exodus 17? Is Yahweh among us or not? Where is this God? Come on! That's how I feel when I get to a red light. You're like, oh, come on, God, why do you hate me? My life should always be green lights, right? This is so much deeper than that. I mean, we get frustrated with the littlest things. You ride shotgun with me and you'll know it doesn't take much to set me off. People are morons when they're driving. Of course, I'm not one of them. So it's really easy. I mean, as easy as it would be to just throw Israel under the bus, like, hey, come on, get with the program. I mean, we're right there all the time. And yet they saw God firsthand, and they refused to believe him. They refused to trust him. They refused to... This nation was on the verge of rioting. Imagine if you feel like you are, you're just dying of thirst. And that's not just a slogan or a bumper sticker. It's legit. You think your family is going to perish. You think your livelihood now, all this livestock that you've just stolen from Egypt, or brought out that was yours, is all going to perish. And it's just going to be corpses in the wilderness. That was the fear. And so the pushback is real. But what does it mean to harden your heart? That's what the text says. The text says, today if you hear his voice, don't harden your heart. Remember back when you complained and quarreled and pushed back and refused to trust me? What does it mean when he says, these people go astray in their heart? It comes down to one word. Unbelief. This place was named Meribah, means quarreling. It was also named Massah, which means testing, based on their unbelief. You see, belief or unbelief leads to actions and choices. And so the warning in this psalm is not to be like that generation who continually distrusted God. They would not believe. Today we identify generations with names like the lost generation, or the silent generation, or the boomer generation, or Generation X, Y, Z. We're very creative people. We're now on to A, the alpha generation. So it's like, man. But God says for 40 years, I loathed that generation. For 40 years. Why? Because they had hard hearts. Because they go astray in their heart. He says, because they don't know me or my ways. They don't know that I really care for them. They refuse to trust me. So one word describes that generation, and it's unbelief. So what's the result of rejecting God, refusing to trust him, refusing to believe him? He says, they've not known my ways. Therefore, verse 11, I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Unable to enter God's rest. See, the promised land was only a shadow. It was only a glimpse of that rest. The substance of that rest is an eternity in the presence of God. Did you catch that? The promised land was just the shadow. The substance is this God. No rest for all eternity. That's a big deal. If you hear the shepherd's voice today, how should you respond? The text says, today if you hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. And we'll say, like the generation of unbelief. Listen. Believe. The writer of Hebrews quotes this psalm, and he writes after the cross, and he says, there still remains a rest for the people of God. If you turn to Hebrews 3 and 4, now we've quoted Hebrews and gone back to Hebrews the last couple of weeks. I would encourage you to take some time and read Hebrews. Try to read it in one sitting. I know it's a lengthier letter, and there's some tension going on in that letter. But even if you read chapters 3 and 4, I think your hearts would be refreshed and encouraged. Here's some highlight reel as the author is quoting Psalm 95 and weaving this in and out. He says in 3:12, take care, brothers. lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God. In verses 16 through 19, for who were those who heard and yet rebelled? Was it not all those who left Egypt and led by Moses? And with whom was he provoked for 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose bodies fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest, but to those who were disobedient? You see that they were unable to enter because of disbelief. The disobedience is identified as unbelief. Chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us fear, lest any of you should seem to have failed to reach it. For the good news, the gospel, came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them, because they were not united by faith with those who listened. Chapter 4, verse 11, let us therefore strive to enter that rest, so that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience. What is that disobedience? Unbelief. The identity of a believer is Jesus. The work of the believer is to believe. Jot down John chapter 6, verses 28 and 29. This is the work of the believer. It's that you believe. It's never about the amount of faith. We often try to measure things. We often try to qualify and quantify, and it's never about the amount of faith, but it's always about the object of our faith. And so the tension under the old covenant was that not all biological descendants of Abraham were true believers. Could you tell who was in and who was out? No. They were all this one community until sometimes the earth opens up and swallows people, and they're like, surely they were not of us. That's scary, right? There's other things throughout the Old Testament that it's like, not everyone who identified, who said, hey, we're descendants of Abraham, we're truly part of believing Israel. Why? Because it came down to the same reality. They had to believe in this God of the covenant. The tension continues under the new covenant. You can be religious. You can attend church services. You can give, you can serve, you can become a member, you can sing, you can do everything else that gives the appearance that you belong to this community, this family of God, and yet still not belong to Christ. You can show up week after week. You can say, yeah, Waukesha Bible Church, they're my people. This is where I identify. Yeah, I go here, and still not know Christ. That's the warning, that's the challenge of this psalm. So to truly be part of Israel meant more than biology. It meant believing from the heart. To truly be part of Israel meant more than conforming to the law. It meant knowing and believing the God of the covenant. Therefore, to be truly part of God's family, to be part of the church, to be one of His people, means more than you grew up in this church or your family attends here. It's that you believe Jesus from the heart. Romans chapter 10, verses 8 through 13 tell us that belief comes from the heart, confession comes from the mouth. So to truly belong to Christ is more than conforming to a set of standards or guidelines. It's knowing and believing Jesus. I would encourage you, if you're going to do some further study this week, to read 1 John in one sitting. It's so encouraging, it's so refreshing, it's so assuring to us of who the people of God are. But as we wrap up and conclude this psalm of worship and warning, we're encouraged to remember this trail experience, to respond in belief, and to rest. As we wrap up, I would like to remind us of the call to worship this morning that Joseph read from Matthew 11. At that time, Jesus declared, I thank you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, that you have hidden these things from the wise and understanding and revealed them to little children. Yes, Father, for such was your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father, and no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Today is the day. If you hear his voice, do not harden your heart. If you hear his voice, believe in Jesus. If you hear his voice, enter his rest. Let's pray. Father, as we wrap up our time together this morning and we continue to think on the text, think on your words. Maybe it's a song that we have sung, sticks in our mind. Maybe we go and explore some of these rabbit trails in Hebrews and 1 John. Maybe we go back to Matthew 11. Refresh our hearts. Fill our heart with song and joy because you are worth celebrating. Encourage us as your people. Reassure our hearts of who we are because of you. Thank you for the invitation to believe you. Simply believe and enter your rest. But maybe there's some here today, Father, that don't know you. They're religious, they're spiritual, but they've not put their faith and trust in the person and work of Jesus. I pray that today you would speak to their hearts and minds, and that they would heed the warning and believe and find rest in you. So Lord, as we continue to celebrate and worship you in song, just thrill our hearts with who you are and who we are in you. In Christ's name, amen.